All right, we are going to do the second part of the 9b lecture. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at a function here, f of x equals x squared minus 2x plus 5. Now 9c, we're going to learn how to graph this on a graph paper, and it's going to be a parabola. And one of the things we're going to find out are the x-intercepts. If you look down here, here's the x-intercept. So basically what's happening is I have this graph, and it's going to go down and it's going to go up, this one is going to go up, and we're going to find these 2 points. So there are the x-intercepts. Now with the x-intercepts, y is always equal to 0. Okay, just like when we had the y-intercept, x was always equal to 0. But for x-intercepts, y is always equal to 0. That's a quick review from Unit 5. So now remember, f of x is just a fancy way of saying y. So really, well, again, x squared minus 2x plus 5 equals 0. Now, this is just like the quadratic formula. Now, we could try to complete the square, but let's use the quadratic formula. And we're going to get used to this. It's negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. As you can tell, it's been ingrained in my head. So now, a is equal to 1. b is equal to negative 2, and c is equal to 5. So when I work this out, negative b, so that's negative 2 plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4 times 1 times 5, all over 2 times 1. So negative 2, that's 2 plus or minus the square root. Now negative 2 squared is 4. 4 times 5, that's minus 20, all over 2. So you can see this is going to work out somewhat nicely. 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 16 all over 2. Now square root of negative 16, you should remember, is 4i. So I have 2 plus or minus 4i over 2. So now, I can divide both of these by 2 here, so this is really 1 plus or minus 4i. So, with that in mind, this is my x value, because remember, my y is equal to 0. So when I type this as a point, there's 2 ways of doing this. One, and these answers are going to look weird. 1 plus 4i, comma, 0. And then put the comma in between the two things, and then 1 minus 4i, comma, 0. And the big thing on this, do not forget the comma. If you do forget the comma, it's going to be wrong. And that's a weird comma to miss. Now, the other way of doing this, to avoid having to type that comma in the middle, you could do or 1 plus or minus 4i, comma, 0. The computer usually takes that answer. So now, the next one here, we're going to type exact answers here again. So again, we got to use the quadratic formula. So it's negative b, so this is, again, a is 16, b is negative 8, and c is 1. So it's negative 8 plus or minus the square root of negative 8 squared minus 4 times 16 times 1, all over 2 times 16. So negative 8, that's 8 plus or minus the square root of 64 minus 64 over 32. Now 64 minus 64, that's 0. Now, there is no such thing as plus or minus 0, so this is just 8/32, which reduces to 1/4. So this is really just a single answer. And so, use a comma to separate answers. In this case, there is only one answer, and that is x is 1/4, y is 0. And really what's happening on this graph, when you have this one solution, if I draw the graph, what it's going to do, it's going to come down, it's just going to touch the x-axis just once. It's not going to go through it like the other one. The other one came down and then came back up, and I had 2 intercepts. for this question only touches the axis, and that's why you only get one solution here. Okay, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. They talk about the discriminant in a second. Now we have two word problems. This first word problem is probably going to be more like what's going to be on the quiz. It's tough, but I think it's a nice question. It's a fair one. So now the next one here is, so I have a rectangle. So I'm just going to draw a little rectangle here. And it says the width is 3 less than the length. So I'm going to make the length x and the width 3 less than it. That tells me the area is 28. So remember, length times width is equal to the area. So I'm going to multiply this out. I get x squared minus 3x equals 28. So now I have a squared term. I can't solve it, so I got to set one side equal to 0, don't I? So I get x squared minus 3x minus 28 equals 0. Now, in 6, you learned how to factor it, and this is actually the easier way of doing this. What factors of negative 28 add up to negative 3? Well, negative 7 and positive 4. So I write this x minus 7, x plus 4 equals 0. And then remember, I have to set each one of these equal to 0 to solve. So I get x equals positive 7, and I get x equals negative 4. Now, we are in the quadratic formula. So, in this case, a is equal to 1, b is equal to negative 3, and c is equal to negative 28. So when I type this in, it's negative b, so that's negative negative 3 plus or minus negative 3 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 28 all over 2 times 1. Now, negative negative 3 is 3 plus or minus. I type this in the calculator and I get square root of 121 all over 2. Now, the square root of 121 is just equal to 11. So this is really 3 plus 11 over 2, or 3 minus 11 over 2. 3 plus 11 is 14 over 2, which is 7. 3 minus 11 is negative 8 over 2, which is negative 4. And you can see those answers match. So when we were doing all these, the quadratic formula does give us the correct answer. All right, the next question. This is the ugly one. The numbers get a little crazy, and we just got to be careful on this one. So now, we have the outside of a picture frame. It's 14 by 20. So I've kind of drawn the picture here a little bit already. And then we put a frame around it. So the frame is all this part here. And so with that in mind, all of the picture, we're only going to see 44 square inches. Now, if we're only seeing 44 square inches, this has got to be a pretty thick thing. Because, I mean, that's a lot of area being covered up. Because 20 times 14 is 280 square inches. And only 44 square inches is showing. So we're taking a lot of the picture out of here. So I got to figure out the distance of this. So now this little square rectangle inside of here, let me do that in green here. So I know from here to here is 20, but then again, I took off an x here and an x here. So the top is really 20 minus 2x. Now this vertical part here, again, this is 14, top to bottom. But again, I took off an x on the bottom and x on the top from this. So it's times 14 minus 2x. And right away, you can see we have some ugly foiling that we got to do right now. Okay. I know, we thought we escaped foiling, but we didn't really completely. So now, 20 times 14 is 280. Then it's minus 40x minus 28x plus 4x squared is equal to 44. Now clearly the 4x squared is not going anywhere. So I'm going to write the 4x squared out first. minus 40x, that's minus 68x. And I wrote an extra minus sign. And then it's going to be plus 280 equals 44. Now, since I have a squared term, it's not going away. I'm going to subtract 44 from each side. So after doing that, now I get some crazy numbers here. I got 4x squared minus 68x plus 236 equals 0. Now I could let a equal 4, b equals negative 68, c equals 236, and crank it out. But I can, if I notice this, I can reduce everything by a 4, just to make it a little simpler on myself. So I get x squared minus 17x plus 59 equals 0. Now, 59 does not factor, that's a prime, and we're not going to get negative 17, so I can't factor like I did the last question, so I have to use the quadratic formula. So, a equals 1, b equals negative 17, and c equals 59. So I'm going from here, and I'm going up to there. So I'll put this in red here. So now, when I type this in, negative, negative b, so that's really 17 plus or minus negative 17 squared minus 4 times 1 times 59 all over 2 times 1. So I get this a little better, 17 plus or minus the square root, and if I type all this in, I get the square root of 53. So if you type the radicand in here, you should get positive 53 over 2. So I get two answers from this. One is 17 plus the square root of 53 over 2. The other is 17 minus, that is a 53, 17 minus the square root of 53 over 2. So now, I need to put the decimal in there because I need to find the answer, and it doesn't really say, but I'm going to round to the nearest hundredth. When I do this question, I get 12.14 inches, and when I do this one, I get 4.86 inches. Now, if I get the answer 12.14, that doesn't really make any sense. Because if I do 20 minus 2 times 12, that's a negative number, and I can't have a negative length on the sides of my frame here. So this makes no sense. So this ends up being my answer. And it is a pretty big thing here. So it's almost, almost 5 inches there. So really this is going to be 5 inches there, 5 inches there. So this is really going to be about 4. And if I do the other one, it's going to be about 10 or 11, and that's about the right answer. So I know it's an ugly question, but there we go. That's our answer here. Now, the next one, much, much better. The rest of the questions are much better. If I got to solve for a here, so what I want to do is I want to get rid of the b squared, so I'm going to subtract b squared from each side. So I get a squared equals c squared minus b squared. So if I want to solve for a, I can do the square root of each side. So I get a equals the square root of c squared minus b squared. Now technically it should be plus or minus, but we all should know this is the Pythagorean theorem. And when we're talking about distances on a triangle, it's always got to be positive. And so that's all we got to do for that one. And so this next one, this is what I was talking about, the discriminant. The discriminant helps us find the number and types of solutions for a quadratic formula question. Now, if you notice, b squared minus 4ac, that's what they call the discriminant. But remember, that's what's under the square root. So remember, for our domain issues in Unit 8, this had to be a positive number. Now, if it's positive, so let's say it's 9, I do the square root of 9, I get positive 3 or negative 3. So I get two real answers. Now, like that one question I did, that one time I got b squared minus 4ac equaling 0, and I only got one solution. And then when it's a negative number, I get two imaginary solutions. to what they call it non-real or imaginary. So now, when I'm looking at this, determine the number of solutions here of the equations. I do not need to solve the whole question. I just need to tell them how many solutions there are and what type of solutions there are. So all I'm going to do is b squared minus 4ac for all these questions. If it's positive, I get 2 real. If it's 0, I get 1. If it's negative, I get 2 non-real ones. So my first one here, b is 2, so this is really 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times 1. Well, 4 minus 4 is 0, so I get 1 solution. I do not need to find it, I just need to tell them what the solution is, how many solutions there are. This next one's written a little weird, but you have to remember it's 3x squared. Since there's no x, I write 0x plus 2 equals 0. So, when I'm doing my b squared minus 4ac, it's really 0 squared minus 4 times 3 times 2. Well, 0 squared is just 0. 0 minus 24, that's negative 24. So it's a negative number, so there's 2 non-real solutions. And basically what you're going to do on these questions, they're going to have a multiple choice and you guess which one it is. Well, don't guess, just do the work here. All right, so you can almost guess this is going to be a positive one. But now, so it's going to be b is negative 7, so I got to square it, minus 4 times 2 times negative 4. So that's 49. Now negative times a negative, so that's going to be plus 32. And so I get 81, so this is a positive number, so I get 2 real, if I could write, 2 real solutions. Alrighty, now I just have the one last questions here, a couple here. Again, now this one, again, we're going to go back to completing the square. They have a couple questions at the end of the homework, and they like to give this on the quiz, so you will have to do this. But you don't have to solve the whole equation. You have just to tell the number that will be needed to complete the square. So if you remember, what we did was we took the b term and we divided it by 2. So in this case, it's really 6 divided by 2, which is 3. And then I have to square it. So that's really 9. And if you remember, what factors of 9 add up to 6? Well, 3 and 3. So now if you had to work it out, you would have had x plus 3 squared. But in this case, again, all they want to know is what's being added here. So really what I'm doing here is I'm taking the b term. So in the end, I'm really going to go 1/2 times b. And then I'm going to square whatever that answer is. So in this case, it's 1/2 times negative 9, or negative 9/2. And now I got to square it. So this is 81/4. So that's my answer for this question. That's what I need to add to both sides. Here, it's 1/2 times negative 20, which is negative 10. Negative 10 squared is 100. And so again, now the fraction one I'm going to avoid doing, but I'll do a quick proof on this. What factors of 100 add up to negative 20? Well, negative 10 and negative 10. So this is really y minus 10 squared, isn't it? And this last one, this is truly an evil one, because we have something attached to the x squared. So I got to divide everything by 4. So I get x squared plus 3/4 x plus, I don't know. And so now, what I have to do is I have to find half of 3/4. So I got to do 1/2 times 3/4, okay, which is 3/8. Then I got to square it. So that is 9/64. So 9 over 64, oops, I'm going to write it here. 9 over 64 is my answer here. Okay. And so if I did want to factor it out form, it's really x plus 3/8 squared. And that's the last part of this 9b. And it's almost 20 minutes. It's a tough one, but we'll ask plenty of questions.